This is the Watchman giving a clarion call. And today I want to walk you through a possible scenario that I've been fleshing out in my own mind about what may be possibly taking place on the world scene in the East right now. There are recent events in silver that have caused me to sit up and take notice. For the last several years, we've watched the powerful, unmistakable trends of China, Russia, and India hoovering up tens of thousands of tons of gold. We've watched the fairly recent trend of India becoming a powerhouse in silver demand. We've watched JP Morgan become a big silver stacker as well, which I've written about. But a brand new trend might be appearing in silver, and if it's not just a blip, but a long-standing trend, it could be very, very important. And I'll go over why that is. But first, I want to give a quick historical backdrop, something which I learned quite some time ago from fellow silver stacker Brother John F. Several centuries ago, the city of London was beginning to run short on silver and needed to find some new silver in order to retain their monetary power. Now, they had to keep the silver flowing, or silver's price explosion would have occurred, upending the City of London's plans to demonetize it, which had already begun, as silver was needed to satiate Eastern demand for commerce. They were trading with China, especially China and India, and Chinese workers and the Chinese government demanded only silver in payment for their goods and services, something which England was running out of. And not having silver would have caused a huge freeze in trade with India and China, and an upward revaluation of silver, causing the East's star to soar to the heavens, while the Western bank's powers were diminished. So, the City of London invaded both India and China. They stole their silver, which equaled hundreds of thousands of tons of silver. Yet the majority of silver actually ever mined and which actually existed in the world at that time. It ruined China's and India's empires, dethroned their emperors, destroyed their economies, and got their people even addicted to drugs during the Chinese Opium Wars. And finally, it took away their ancient silver standards from their peoples. I mean, China's and Indian silver demands, silver standards were in place and they're in their economies until the 1930s. Okay, World War II was almost on the horizon when the banksters finally forced India and China off of their silver standards. Incredible. It was a wicked, vicious crime spree perpetrated by the Western banking dragon against nearly half the world's population. There's actually a very interesting movie about that period around the Opium Wars and the fallout and steady decline of China in regards to its silver standard. And that movie was called The Empire of Silver. It details how China lost its silver and its mojo, its long-standing cultural economic power after the invasions by the City of London. Watchman, that's interesting, but what does that have to do with China's recent huge purchases of silver that we're seeing? Well, I'm getting to that. China and India both have a remarkable regal history with silver. Nearly 18 months ago, I wrote a series that I think remains one of the most crucial that I've ever written about silver and gold in the Western banking cabal. And that series was entitled the Pressure Point Knockout Series. And it was meant to answer this question. If silver is the kill shot for the banking dragon that's ravaging our world, why don't China and India pull the trigger and end this foul beast's life? Why instead are these major Eastern powers going for the gold instead of the silver? Now, the theory I put forward back then may play a helpful role today in trying to understand this powerful new trend of silver buying in China. We are seeing a rapid massive buildup in silver stockpiling and purchasing in China at the Shanghai Futures Exchange. Okay, the data is unmistakable, as in just the past 6 months at the Shanghai Exchange, their stockpiles have gone from roughly 7 million ounces to nearly 60 million ounces of silver. 60 million in 6 months. This means they're buying silver at a far, far faster rate than JP Morgan has for the past 5 years. In fact, they've bought as much silver in 6 months as JP Morgan has in 5 years. That's almost 10 times as fast, 10 times as much. Now, this is a huge surge, which honestly, if you look at the face of it, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, think about it. Silver right now remains largely a side event in China. Most Chinese citizens still prefer gold to silver, and they buy over 2,000 tons of it per year of gold. The Chinese really don't stack silver as they do gold, at least not yet. Silver largely remains a niche market in China, small and mostly relegated to numismatic products. Is what it's used for. Gift giving, for they like to print these little monetary bills made out of silver with images stamped on them, things like that. It only takes a few million ounces a year. Silver's not the main story in China right now. So what's going on here? Why is China suddenly taking on a much, much larger stake in silver buying? Well, I've got a hunch about it, and it has to do with that Silver Pressure Point series I wrote several years ago. I think it's possible this buildup in silver stocks in China could be a prelude to China moving into silver in a big way and using it as a final kill shot, the final dagger's blow, if need be, against the Western banksters when the time is right. Remember this, silver is the kill shot for the banksters, the pressure point knockout, but gold is the bank's source of power. If China and India suddenly moved in, swooped in, and bought up all the silver, they could likely take down the system, yes, but have you ever seen the film Terminator 2? Okay, that's good. Remember the villain in it named T-1000? Remember how in the film they kept shooting and killing T-1000 over and over again, but T-1000 just kept coming back. He kept congealing. The pieces, the fragments of him after being shot would just meld back together, reform itself, and then continue its onslaught. Well, that's kind of how the banksters are, because if their system is destroyed, yes, it wreaks havoc on them, but as long as they maintain their golden stockpiles, they can come back together every single time and continue their plans and their onslaught against the human race. China knows that it's the banksters' gold that has to be taken from them in order to take their pricing power of gold and silver away, because they had fought them once using silver and they lost because they didn't realize the absolutely extreme quantities of gold that their enemies possessed. And once the pricing power is taken away from the West to price gold and silver, along with sufficient gold quantities, then and only then can the silver attack angle be taken against this huge banking beast. Now hear me now. If China is doing this, if they're starting to move into silver in a serious way, it's likely because the process of cornering gold could be almost over. Think about it. For the last 10 years especially, China and India have drained several Fort Knox's worth of gold from the West. But China has been moot, strangely moot, on the topic of silver. They haven't really done anything to begin quartering that resource at all, except for the considerable silver they mine domestically. And really, they used most of that for their internal industrial demands and their infrastructure building. So this new silver stacking above and beyond seems different, and if they intend to have a silver play, if this is the beginning of that play, they have to have the right game plan. They have to have the power to end this at any moment. This huge market rigging con at any moment, and they have to do it right. There's a right way and a wrong way to do it, and there are no do-overs. One misstep in this plan, and so much can go wrong. And very soon I will talk about why I think the time could be right for China to move into silver, what steps the Chinese have already been taking over the last 10 years to lay the groundwork for silver accumulation, and finally, what their plan of attack might be going forward. I'll cover all this and more next time on the Clarion Call. This is the Watchman signing off. Stay vigilant and bring the fight to them.